there is another way. There's a better way. There's a more, forget work-life balance. Let's just talk about balance. Forget, like being reckless or ruthless with the kind of things you're trying to tackle. Let's do something reasoned, right? Let's bring that back into play.
I'm here today with Mike Vardy, who's a father. He's a husband, he's a writer, he's a productivity strategist, and he's the creator of the TimeCrafting approach to time and tasks, which we're definitely going to dive into because there are a lot of things that you talk about in your approach that are very, very similar to mine. Your work has also been featured in Lifehacker, Fast Company, Huffington Post, and Forbes. And you've also taught productivity practices on online education platforms such as Creative Live, Skillshare, and LinkedIn Learning. And I cannot emphasize enough how excited I am about whatever's going to come from today's conversation with Mr. Mike Vardy, the Productivityist. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Zack. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah. As we talked about a little bit offline before we started, anybody that's looking to get the latest hacks in Trello or Evernote or Notion, or how do I automate through doing 7 different zaps, this is not going to be the conversation for you today. Not because you and I couldn't have that conversation, and I have a feeling that one might last us about 7 hours. However, I get the impression from your background and your journey similar to mine that you're kind of over a lot of that stuff, not because it doesn't work, but because you're starting to realize there's a bigger picture around what it truly means to be productive and really value your time and to get the more out of your life. Would that be a fairly accurate assumption about where you are in your current personal journey?
Absolutely. And it's interesting. I was talking to Alan Henry, who was the editor-in-chief at Lifehacker. And I think he was a staff writer when I was the managing editor of Lifehack. And Alan's got a new book out as we record this called Seen, Heard, and Paid, the New Rules for the Marginalized Worker. And we've crossed paths, but never actually spoken before. And I had him on my podcast. It's on an upcoming episode. And we basically chatted about, we're both in the same place. We both worked for websites that largely propagated or were purveyors of what you would call probably productivity porn, right? Like this idea of and I remember when I left Lifehack, the reason I left is that we reached the goal that we set out to reach, and then they wanted me to triple what I had done, and that involved publishing more hacks. I'm like, and that was I was already feeling the pull of life hack. Like when you think of the term hack, it means to cut, and to often cut without care. I'm like, do we really want to be doing that with our lives in every aspect? And really what a life hack should be is it should speed up the things that, should be sped up so that you can have time to do the more deliberate thinking and the deliberate work, the qualitative stuff. And so, yeah, as much as I wrote for the Next Web and Cult of Mac and know all the apps inside, and out, at least I used to, there's something bigger there. And frankly, it's more of there's more edge cases around that. Like the bulk of people out there aren't going into Notion and building like these elaborate, quantitative measuring tools or, They need something simple. They need something that will help them get through today, but also to help them look ahead and make sure that they can get through tomorrow and the next tomorrow and the next tomorrow. And I think that's where I want to spend more time, as opposed to, set up this Zap or here's how you can create very elaborate, kind of workings inside of whatever app you're choosing. Oh, sorry, that app is now out of business. Now you need to go to something else. Like it's just the things I want to talk about are more timeless.
Yeah, and I'm very much in the same place. And when I saw that you had done things for like LinkedIn Learning and Creative Live, have been known for years on LinkedIn Learning, formerly lynda.com, as the Trello guy. So if you want to learn Trello, I'm the guy. And it's now like clockwork every 18 months. Ping, email in my inbox. So Trello is completely changed and outdated, and we need you to redo the entire program. 3-4 years ago, I was excited about that. Now I'm just like, Okay, I've kind of moved on from like, the Trello automations and building the lists and the boards. And to be very clear, still love Trello, still use it to manage my life and my tasks. But there's so many much more important things that I want to talk about when it comes to the value of time, because you talked about this concept of productivity porn. It's very similar to the way that I now talk about this as the cult of productivity.
Yeah.
Where essentially, because we're learning all of the tools and all of the apps and all of the zaps and all of the automations, what happens is that yesterday's miracle just becomes today's expectation.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
It's interesting because we talk about, I wrote an atomic essay. I was in this Ship 30 for 30 program that's very popular for writers, digital writing. And you had to write an atomic essay every day. And I did it mainly just to kind of get back into the rhythm of writing something that was more public, because I read a lot of, working on books and stuff like that. I'm doing more hidden stuff. And then I've got my podcast and all that stuff, or stuff that's not quite ready for release yet. But with these atomic essays, I was kind of forced to do it. And one of the essays, it was about like the one thing you don't want to hear about productivity that you need to hear. And I said, productivity is fundamentally broken. Like, it really is. And I think that it's more apparent now, we're not even post-pandemic because we're still in it, but in this pandemic era, if we're going to talk about it that way, because people are really trying to ramp things back up to that pre-pandemic level. And things have changed so radically in a lot of ways. There's not as many people doing the same jobs. People recognize that, hey, you know what? The world didn't stop like completely. Like, I didn't, there were things that definitely did happen, but I think it was kind of people talk about the Great Reset and all that stuff. I think that it opened our eyes to like, to what end are we doing these things, right? And to your idea of the cult of productivity, like to what end? And I think that people need to know that there is another way. There's a better way. There's a more, forget work-life balance. Let's just talk about balance. Forget, like being reckless or ruthless with the kind of things you're trying to tackle. Let's do something reasoned, right? Let's bring that back into play. And you can't do that with apps, because apps ultimately, while they are great tools, was it Thoreau that said men have become the tools of their tools? That's kind of what happens with them. And at the end of the day, Trello is owned by, what are they owned by now? Atlassian.
Atlassian, right? Yeah.
We know at some point in time, something's going to change, right? Because look what happened with Wunderlist a few years ago. Microsoft acquired it. What's happened to Wunderlist? It's not what it was. And all the people that were like, but you took my app away. I'm like, but that's not the problem. The problem is you should have something that you could either, if you had a napkin, you should be able to do it. And I think that we end up talking about the wrong thing. And that's why, like, even productivity could be maybe we should be talking about prioritization instead of productivity, because some people think that, productivity is more important than prioritization. But that's the exact opposite thing. If you're producing things that don't matter, are you being productive? Right. So these conversations are the ones that need to happen, as opposed to, again, like you updating that Trello course, or me, when we released Do Better with the Sun, me and Jeremy Roberts a few years ago, literally weeks after we put the book out, they changed their entire user interface. And I was like, I don't want to chase the dragon anymore. Like, it's just too, there's people that do it. And I like Francesco on Keep Productive, God bless him. Like, and he's made it work, but he's also doing other things like building apps like Bento and things like that. So there is a place for it, but I think that it's been given too much space.
Yeah. Other than the glasses and the full head of hair, feel like I'm talking into a mirror right now. This is kind of creepy. I'm sure that my producer, Debbie, who's on the mic, is thinking the same thing. As soon as you mentioned work-life balance, no, let's stop talking about that. Everybody thinks of me as, oh, you're the work-life balance guy. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I don't want to be the work-life balance guy, because it's a myth. It does not exist. And you're working towards the wrong thing. Yep. So the concept that I talk about, and you might have a different variation of it, but I talk about this idea of work-life presence. I'm never going to have a balanced amount of I'm working an equal amount to life and I have an equal amount of energy for my family versus for my job.
Mm-hmm.
It's a matter of choosing, like you said, prioritizing where I want to put my energy, and I'm being present with my kids. I might not have a balanced amount of number of hours versus my work, but when I'm with my kids, I'm with my kids. When I'm on a podcast interview, I am on a podcast interview. When I'm with a client, I'm with a client. When I'm not with a client, I'm doing something else. So for me, it's all about developing the skill of presence, and that requires prioritization because you need to be confident this is where my attention is required.
Right. And you brought up attention, which is really important because people think productivity is about efficiency and effectiveness and all that. I'm like, no, those are byproducts. That's not what it is. Productivity the way I define it is productivity is the active linking of your intention with your attention. So what do I intend to do? How am I going to pay attention to it? And the problem is we often have one without the other, right? So we have all this attention, but it's going to nowhere where we intended, which is like, I'm going to go on my phone and, oh, look, this thing. And all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, what happened? I didn't do the thing and you don't have a way for your brain to go, whoa, hold on. Right now, I know I should be doing this. How do I make sure that my attention goes there as opposed to the thing that's vying for my attention, be it social media, be it email, be it whatever. Conversely, you could have all the intention in the world. Like, so that's the problem is if you have this intention, I'm going to work on a book, I'm going to do something creative, whatever it is, but you don't have that waypoint to say, here's how you're going to pay attention to it. So you make measured progress on it, then that intention is powerless. So, and conversely, if you have all this attention, but you're not giving it any intention, it's directionless. And so at the end of the day, then if you start to link those things together, then you get more efficient. Then you get more effective. It's the same thing you mentioned, like work-life presence. I love that idea. Just presence. Like we don't need adjectives in front of it anymore. I mean, we're at a point, I think one of the things that I came to realize is I stopped fighting the battle that the industrial complex kind of put in place. So prioritization is a good example. You've read Essentialism by Greg McKeown, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I've had him on the show twice. Yep.
Right. So Greg talks about priorities and how there's no such thing because the word priorities didn't exist until the Industrial Revolution, where it was designed to get people to do more stuff, right? Because priority literally means the next thing. You can't go into any large organization now and, go in waving on your soapbox and say, no, you can't have more than one priority, because they're going to look at you like you're a crazy person. Like, we know that. Anyone who studies this stuff knows that. But the average person that we're trying to help, whether they're at the top of the chain or in the middle or whatever, they're like, no. I've heard of why would we have to have prioritization if there's only one priority? We would need it, which is true. Same thing with work-life balance. We're at a point now where work and life are so seamlessly integrated in a lot of ways. It's almost like harmony would be a better term, right? Because you have too much of it, it sounds crappy. You have just the right amount, it's perfect. So rather than put the adjective work-life, the only reason you would do that is if you felt you were trying to focus on work and life. That was the thing you were trying to balance. But if you're trying to lead a balanced life, that's going to involve things like, life then all of a sudden expands. It's not just life, it's friendships, it's it's all that stuff. Work, same thing. I mean, creatives especially. I'm a writer first and foremost. I know you're in the creative industry too, right? Like, so you can't turn that off. Like, I can literally, like, I was reading that diary I was showing you earlier, The Assassin's Cloak, and the first line is about how the diary is like a drink. And it basically described how it's like addictive, and you often say things in there that you shouldn't say or you don't have any authority to speak about. Now, this book called The Assassin's Cloak, which was put together in 2000, was during the very genesis of social media. So when he says this about the diary, this quote, I don't think that's about a diary. That's about social media. No one's really sitting now going, I'm addicted to journaling, but they might be addicted to social media, which, when you think about it, social media is a form of journaling. You're just doing it for the whole world. So you can't, when you start putting adjectives in front of things, it's designed to draw attention, which I think is great. But when it's done too much, it loses its power, it loses its weight, and then you might end up, oddly enough, imbalanced as a result. Like you said, if you work and life don't, I mean, they're never going to be 100% equal, like 50-50. It's not going to work that way. So I think, and I know I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent here, but I imagine you'd be doing the same if you were looking in the mirror, is this idea that productivity being fundamentally broken is because we focused on the way that productivity has evolved over there. Being productive, the term literally means in its genesis is to bring into being. That's what produce. That's what it was. Then productive is the having the quality of being able to produce. But now if you look up the word productive and therefore productivity, it means the power or quality to produce, comma, especially in abundance. So now all of a sudden it isn't just about making something or bringing something into being. It's about bringing lots of things into being. It's about, so now people are confused, and naturally we have to make a lot of things. The only way you're productive is if you do a lot of stuff, but that's not true. That's not true. Quentin Tarantino has made 9 films so far, right? He's got a 10. There are people who have made way more films than he has. I don't necessarily like all of his films, but they all are impressive pieces of work. And when he's done those 10, he knows I've made 10 things that I can really say that where I was productive, right? As opposed to the person who makes 40 films and there's a couple of hits in there, but you know what I mean? So I think that if we can get, and when I say we, I'm talking in general, can get people thinking differently about productivity, reframing it a bit, I think we're going to be in a much better place. Tools can help, but we need to reframe it first.
Yeah, and one of the most important words that I've thrown as a caveat or a qualifier to just about any sentence when it comes to productivity, time management, whatever it might be, especially with my clients, is the word sustainable. Right. If I want to build a productive life, or I want to build a career, or whatever, like for me, I've got 3 major, huge kind of, buckets in my life. One of which is creative professional, one of which is entrepreneur, one of which is American Ninja Warrior. Oh, by the way, totally forgot. I also have to be a dad. I've got to be a husband. Like, it never ends. Right. Mm-hmm. But this idea that if the only way for it to be considered successful in my mind is to do all of it sustainably. If I can't do that, I feel like I failed.
So what's interesting is what's the word that people focus on instead of sustainable? What do they, when they think about like, I've got to do something and be productive, it's sustainable is the word they should be using, but they use consistency instead. Mm-hmm. Problem is if you do you can't, like, if you're doing something, so the podcast, we talked about this before, like I've done over 400 episodes of a productive conversation, which used to be called the Productivityist podcast. That's consistency. I've been doing it consistently, but there's things I have not done, part of that, like marketing it, all that stuff. And the reason I haven't done that is because I couldn't sustain it. So I have to be okay with, there's certain things I'm not going to be able to do because it's not sustainable. And I think what happens is we put the cart before the horse. We're like, I need to be consistent. That's all that matters, being consistent. But if you can't sustain it, then you won't be consistent. So if you say, what can I sustain? Then you can be consistent with that thing. That's why when I made TimeCrafting, when I kind of forged this philosophy / approach, it was, I wanted it to be simple, flexible, durable, and sustainable. Like it had to have all those qualities. And if it didn't, then it's so easy for things to fall by the wayside. Like, getting things done is a phenomenal productivity framework, but so many people fall down when it comes to the weekly review, or they never get past the 20 to 30 to 40,000 feet, the horizons of focus. Does that mean that it's sustainable? And when we talk about the cult of productivity, there's a cult of GTD. There's a cult of getting things done. And if you don't do all of it, it becomes an absolutism, right? Like, if you're not doing it all, then you're not GTDing. And then all of a sudden you start to have productivity shame and regret, like all these other things that show up. You need to be able to look at things simply and sustainably. And that's why it's hard, I think, for creatives, especially because they want to create and they want to create so much. And they also want to do it when they've made something, I don't know if you're like this, but I know I am. And I've worked hard to get past it. Once I've made something, it's like my brain goes, okay, I've made that. Now I need to make something else instead of promoting the thing I made, or because my brain goes, well, it's out there, so everyone's seen it, which is total nonsense, but that's what the brain does. So instead of making it better, reshaping it, repurposing it, I just try to make something new. And I did that for a long time. And guess what? That wasn't sustainable. Like, it wasn't. So if you can get, I think another big message is, you can't do consistency first. You need to do sustainable first and then get consistent after that fact, right?
So we've transitioned from me looking into a mirror to me staring into the depths of my soul. As soon as you said this idea of as soon as I'm done with something, it's now out of my head. Therefore, everybody knows that it exists and everybody understands it. Time to make something else. You just described the last 8-year journey of me building an online business. Hey, I've got this online course. I'm working really hard on it. I've got all these ideas. If the ideas don't get out of my brain, I'm going to go crazy. So I'm going to put all this into frameworks and lessons and modules, and I'm going to build a funnel, and I'm going to get people into the funnel, and I'm going to launch it. I've got people in the course. Awesome. Time for the next course. Not so much. But that's a pattern that I'm continually stuck in because it's hard for me to stop and not take the ideas out of my head because the noise is just never ending. It's like you said, it's very hard to separate work from life because they're the same thing now because of the technology, because of working from home and Zoom and our phones and everything else. There is no separation of work and life. Right. So for me, it doesn't matter where I am or what I'm doing. If I have the idea, must execute on idea. Oh, I can't execute it on it today. Well, then it needs to go in Evernote. But no, it needs to go into a mind map because that's part of my system. Oh, does this need to be a card in Trello? I'm not sure. But the idea just cannot separate from, nope, hold this idea until tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. Mm-hmm. Right? And
so you do capture though, right? Like
God, yes.
Relentlessly, like I've got last night I was sitting at a pub with a buddy. I went and saw some art and I keep like little mini field notes style notebooks in my pocket. Mm-hmm. And I wrote down my journal entry because I didn't want to put my phone out. And then I wrote down what I called my 6 standards. So it's like, these are rules that I think I'm going to try to follow. And I wrote them down and I wrote like rules for a night owl. And I just started noodling that stuff. I think that the mantra of capture everything, regret nothing really applies. I think if you get it, because then, and this is one of the things that, again, David Allen teaches in Getting Things Done, like mind like water, right? If you can get it out of your head, then, and put it someplace that you trust, that's the key, then you can get back to whatever it was you were doing. So, I mean, I wrote down rules for a night owl and then I'm like, okay, it's done. I can leave it there. And I mean, obviously I have to have a mechanism to go back to look in this notebook, which I do. I put it in. It's the mundane stuff that matters in those instances. Like in my to-do list app, it says review things in inbox. Okay. Shouldn't I know to do that? Probably, but I don't trust myself to do that. So and it's the same thing with Halloween decorations. We're recording this just before Halloween and I have every October 1st, it's like decide when to put Halloween decorations up in Todoist. And every October 1st, it shows up. This is where tools can be super handy because I don't have to think about it anymore. It's been captured once and comes back to me every time I need it to. And it's this mundane, silly stuff that my brain would easily go, it's time for me to work on this thing that I'm really excited about. That's going to be hard. You know what I should do instead? I should go get the Halloween decorations and bring them out from under the house. So when it comes to the and you talked about how it's been your journey over the last 8 years. It's the same for me. Like I've got to build this new thing. It's out there, so it's new. So I have to get it out there. Or worse, I capture an idea and I announce it. So I'm like, I'm going to build this thing. And then either I don't, or I give myself unrealistic timelines to do it. And we all tend to take on more than we should. And I think that's ultimately, again, back to this idea of productivity being about doing lots as opposed to doing right. And that's where, it's an ongoing struggle. And again, when it comes to this idea of work-life balance or just balance in general and having the reason, I think the problem happens for a lot of people when their work is their calling or it's purposeful or meaningful, right? I have a friend of mine who still works for Costco, which is where that's what brought me out west here to Victoria, BC. And he is still a forklift driver for Costco. And I say still, it sounds like I'm being, kind of downplaying it, but he knew that working for Costco was just a means to an end. It was to earn money. He basically plays online poker, I think. But he's done by like 3 p.m. every day, maybe even sooner now. And he gets to spend time with his family. And that's what he wants to do. And he doesn't need, Mike, tell me about like how this thing works or what my framework needs to be. Not everybody needs it, but I think if there's like this purposeful element that takes you beyond, especially entrepreneurial or creative, you can't turn that off. And that's why like keeping a notebook with you or having like this is where an app like Drafts for iOS can be super helpful, or Evernote or something like that. And maybe reading Tiago's Building a Second Brain book or any of that stuff can be super helpful because it gets it out of your head. And I've said this before, your mind was meant to be a factory, not a warehouse. So if you can get things out of here, then the mind can be the factory it's meant to be.
Yeah. And when it comes to all those ideas, I go back to something you said very, very early in the conversation about how if you rely on the apps or you rely on the tools, they're inevitably going to let you down. Mm-hmm. If you have a system, it doesn't matter what the tools are. And you said, you can do it on a napkin. Mine's a lot more vivid. I tell my students that if you don't want to use Trello, fine, use Asana, use Notion. I don't care about any of that, but you need to have a system such that if all you have is Post-it notes and your own blood, you can still be able to work through the process and be very clear on this is the one thing that I should be doing that's actually intentional and meaningful, and it's a good, productive, effective use of my time based on my values and the things that I really want to accomplish in life. But I think that here's the challenge that I have, which you brought up,
sure,
is that when you mention somebody that is doing a forklift job to make a living so they have time for other things in their life, mm-hmm. my only response to this, man, that sounds wonderful. I'm not wired that way.
No, I get it. I get it.
I wish that I understood it, but you're right. When your work is your calling and your work is what fulfills you, and I would say for most, I don't want to make a blanket generalization, but I bet the vast majority of highly creative people, their work needs to be some form of their calling because their identity is wrapped up in my ability to create and generate new ideas. It can either be your superpower or it can be your kryptonite. And for me, it vacillates between both, where every once in a while, it's clearly a superpower. This is my calling. I'm having an impact on the world. I'm helping people. And then I'll have one day off. I'm like, but I'm not having an impact on people and I'm not creating something and I'm worthless, right? It can be a double-edged sword, very much so.
Well, and that's why, when people, like I was blogging every day for a while, and when I stopped, my brain went to that place, which is like, you didn't make anything today. And that's what you do. So you didn't do anything. Like it literally, and it's that weird battle between like the higher reasoning part of your brain and then the primitive part, the part and that's an ongoing battle. Like most people, that's why habits work, right? Because habits help short circuit that battle that's going on. But all I had to do was say, but I'm a writer, so I should be. So I went, I'm a writer. I should be blogging every day. I'm blogging, like I'm writing. So therefore, and I eventually decided that, first off, again, not sustainable. I said, well, wait a minute. I'm a writer. It doesn't mean I have to publish daily. It just means I have to write daily. And the only time you can have those conversations with yourself is when you're not doing anything else but having those conversations with yourself. So you need to take a beat. Whether it's meditation, which I think is going for a walk. Actually, one of the rules I wrote down, rule number 3, when in doubt, go for a walk or a run or something in between, which basically means just get out of the space, right? And I think that, again, we're so predisposed, and there's a propensity to, like, if we're not actively doing something, then we're not doing anything. And there's that old adage about, I read this story once about a writer and his wife, and the wife would go to work and she'd come home every day and the writer was like always staring out the window. And after about a week of her just coming home and seeing this, she said, hey, when are you actually going to do some writing? And he goes, I am. And it's hard to describe that. But to your point, what's worse in some instances, speaking of the kryptonite, is sometimes you're writing when you don't want to be writing. You don't necessarily want to be like, and that's why, again, I love the notebook factor of capturing, because I'll just write down, like I will write down in here the action, like I call it my AM list, right? So A for action, always start with a verb, just give your brain a break, for crying out loud. You don't want to be looking at something that says milk and like, am I supposed to buy milk? Milk cow, what am I supposed to do? It's a bad example, but you know what I mean.
No, that's the perfect example. I love it and I'm stealing it.
Bill is better. I actually say like Bill, and it's like, am I supposed to pay a bill, call Bill? Like, what am I supposed to do? Verbs, they just active, like, so they activate it. And then I have another column that's the M column, which is mode. Like, what mode do I need to be in? So for example, energy. I use energy a lot. I think, and I would love to chat a bit about what I actually think about time management in a little bit, but energy is something that we don't leverage enough. We don't go, oh, well, I'm tired, so I guess I'm just not going to do anything. It's better to say I'm tired. What can I do when I'm tired? Right? Or I'm a night owl. I'm really, really wired right now. What can I do when I'm in able to do a lot of stuff? So I will literally write in that column, like either an energy level that I need to be, or the time, like, is this a 5-minute task, or is this like a 25-minute task, or this is a writing task? So I'll put like the mode, and then like, and in TimeCrafting, there's like categories and all that stuff, which people can get that. When we wrap up, I'll give them like a link to get the starter kit for free. But that way, when I look at this, I can go, oh, okay, so these are all the things I captured. And then I can, work my way through them however I see fit, either do them or move them into the master planner or whatever. But if I'm at the park with my kids or at the beach with my kids, and that comes to mind, I can literally just write it down, not pull my phone out, and then get back to what we were doing, back to the task at hand. But the only way I can do that is through that pause, is through that brief moment of like, okay, you know what? This is not the time for this. Let me get it out so that I can see it when it is the time for this. And we don't live in a world that provides breaks. The world is moving at such a breakneck pace that it breaks necks. Like, that's literally how I feel about it.
Yeah, and it's funny that you talk about this idea of taking the walk, because for years I was up against a ton of resistance, and I don't work so much in the Hollywood studio system anymore, because like you, I'm largely independent and now an entrepreneur full time and doing the podcast and the coaching and the courses. But for a long time, worked in the Hollywood studio system, and people would come into my office and I wasn't there, and they're like, you're being paid to be at your desk and do the work. I'm like, well, I was taking a walk. Well, we don't only have a certain amount of time for breaks. I'm like, I wasn't taking a break. Mm-hmm. I was working through a really difficult problem. Right. And I get all of my best ideas and solve all of my problems when my body is in motion, which is this thing called science. There's actually proof that this works. Yep. So I remember once I had a really difficult creative challenge with this really complex scene. It was when I was working on the TV show Empire at the time, which at the time was the #1 show in the United States. All kinds of pressure, crazy deadlines, and I just had the sequence I couldn't work through. So I walked out of my office and I ran the steps in the building 3 times until I was completely and totally out of breath, which, when your work clothes, not the best idea, because I was, kind of sweaty and a little stinky. But as soon as I was done, I'm like, I got it. Eureka. Right? Walked into my office and in 5 minutes, done. Problem fixed. If I had stared at my computer for the same 30 minutes, I would have come up with nothing. That to me is a productivity tool or productivity system. Nobody thinks about that.
No, because it's too good to be true, right? It's the same thing when I say to people, like, theming your days. Like, I theme my days. So today is actually a day I don't theme. So it's Friday. Friday is what I call my cheat day. So I don't have a theme, which gives me some flexibility. Again, we talked about that, to do a bunch of other things. So, but it creates, again, it's interesting because it's a cheat day. I also know that it's the day where I'll have calls with friends. And if I have to have an appointment or I want to have a conversation, I can do it on that day, because it's, so there is, oddly enough, cheat day is defined in some ways as a theme day. So for example, tomorrow is my family day. Saturday is family day. Now, again, this is why it's too good to be true. I will have people say to me, well, isn't every day a family day for you? I'm like, yes, I guess, but I want the overarching focus to be my family on that day. And that's what theming is. And people, when I mention it to them, they'll say things like, oh, there's no way I could theme my day. Like, there's no way. And that's where story helps. And I know that you know a lot about story. And story is like, if you can, I remember watching the movie Comedian with Jerry Seinfeld. And one of the things he said as defining comedy was stand-up and comedy in general is making the ordinary extraordinary or the extraordinary ordinary. And I thought about this in terms of, and I gave you a bit of an example with the to-do list situation. Like, I try to bring real world practical things that people can relate to help them understand that this could work. So for example, if someone says, oh, there's no way I could theme my day. I'll go, hey, do you watch college football? I'm like, oh, I love it. Love it. You watch like the whole slate of games when it's on? Yeah. Like, I mean, I follow Alabama, but I'll watch like all the games. I'm like, okay. Do you like the NFL too? Yeah. Oh yeah. I love NFL. Okay. So that's Sunday, right? But college is Saturday, right? Yeah. So like all the college games are generally on Saturday. Yeah. That's when I give my, yeah. And then all of a sudden they have this light bulb. I'm like, so Saturday is college football day. That's a theme. So all I'm doing is you already do it. Just name it, define it, give it clarity. Because again, clarity, I think Thomas Merton said this, clarity affords focus, right? So because Saturday is my family day, I know, and conversely, my family knows that, hey, Dad, do you want to go see Black Adam on Saturday? So there's a preconceived kind of thought process to, I know Dad wants to see Black Adam. I want to see it. I want the answer to be yes. So I know if I say, can we go see it Saturday? Dad's brain goes, well, Saturday's family day. Of course, yes, it's Saturday. We should totally do that. And I theme every day of the week except for Friday, which no one should start doing, by the way, either. That's the other thing is, another problem with productivity is when they take on a new system, they go, okay, I can do all these things and do all this and do all that. And then one thing breaks and everything falls apart, right?
Yeah, it just doesn't work for me. The system doesn't work for me.
That's it. Exactly. And so I will do things like, and again, when I talk about modes, I actually, the only other thing I have scheduled to do today, Zach, is to watch the World Series Game 1. Like, I'm going to watch the Houston Astros, who are the villains, but I'm a pro wrestling fan, so I kind of like the heels every once in a while against the Phillies. But I use that as an example when I talk about modes. Like, think about baseball pitchers. You've got like five starters, and they can give you, if they're designed to give you at least 6 innings of work. That's what they should do. So I have what I call starter modes. So for example, a theme would be a starter mode. Like, what's today's theme? Today's theme is training. Okay, what are all the training tasks I can do? Or it's maintenance. Okay, what are all the maintenance? So I should be able to get through the bulk of my day, whether it's work or life, all the day, working through that theme. That would be a starter theme. And there's a couple others you could use as well. But then there's the relievers, the bullpen, right? And each bullpen pitcher is designed to, some are long relievers, some are short relievers. The closer is the one that should be only have to really pitch 1 inning. And I call so there's the reliever modes. And those are the ones that I usually reserve for like time and energy. So if you're in a crunch and you're stuck, well, natural questions that you would ask yourself are one of 2 things. How much time do I have and how do I feel? So if you say, how much time do I have? Well, I only have 30 minutes. Okay, how many 5-minute tasks can I bang out? Bang, 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 bang. You get 6. There's math there. And then if it's energy, if you're like, oh, I'm kind of tired. Okay, well, what can I do when I'm tired? Oh, here are all the tasks that I've identified as tasks I can do when I'm tired. And that gets you out of the jam. It gets things going. And when I can relate that to people, most people will actually, interestingly, use time and energy because it's the most human. They can relate to it. And I think that if we can start relaying the most human experiences, the things that make us the most human and not so automated, that's where people will feel truly productive, because they're going to do the right things at the right time based on factors that they didn't even realize that they had the agency to choose around, right? And going for a walk is a classic example of that. And so when I tell people, hey, just look at your list and whatever, you want to answer the question, what do I do when I'm sick today? I can't come into work. Okay, well, just do your low energy tasks instead of not doing anything because you don't have, seems too good to be true. Well, try it. Don't try it all at once, because like you said, it won't work. But theme one day, choose, categorize your tasks by one type of mode and see where it takes you. And I guarantee you it will take you further than you're getting right now, when the chips are down, when things are tough, when you need to go for that walk.
Yeah, there's two things in here that I want to dig into even deeper because I love these ideas so much. And I've been doing theming for years without knowing it actually had a name. Yep. So I'm glad that there's now a label that's approved by a productivity expert. That's one of the things that I found that was so valuable and useful, frankly, just for reducing conflict in my marriage. Because as a creative, if I'm in the middle of something and I work from home and have for years, hey, can you do this thing real quick? And I'm like, I'm just not in the mindset. Yep. And it continually frustrated me. So I finally had the conversation with my wife. I said, listen, it's not that I don't want to do things for you. It's that the timing of you bringing it to me when I'm in the middle of work is bad. Yep. So just ask yourself the question, is this something that needs to be done immediately? If it is, I will do it. If it's not, know that whatever is on your list, I'm going to do it on Saturday morning. Yep. Saturday mornings where the light bulbs get fixed and the garbage cans are taken care of and this and that. So she now knows that what she wants done is a priority. We've just found a way to theme it in such a way that unless it's like, hey, people are coming over in 2 hours and this needs to be fixed. Well, I got to drop my shit and I got to make it happen.
Yeah.
But it's always.
And you'll do that sometimes because you're in a tough spot. Like if you're working through a tough problem, it's way easier. Like if this light bulb above me burns out right now, it's way easier for me to change that light bulb than to go write something for my book, right? It's way easier. There's that old adage, how do you get a writer to clean his desk? Give him a book deadline, right? Like, or get him to write a book or whatever it is. I mean, and that's the thing. So it works both ways. Like not only are you helping your wife out, your partner, whatever, you're creating this mutual understanding of what this looks like, but also you're helping yourself out because your brain knows this isn't the day I change the light bulbs. This isn't the day I do this. And that's that battle between the part of your brain that goes, hey man, I just want to get by. Like, can't we just do what we need to do to survive? And the part that wants to thrive, which is like, no, the part that wants the purposeful work, the meaningful relationships. Because frankly, the amygdala, the older part of your brain just wants to, it's all about like procreating and surviving, and it doesn't care. Like, it doesn't care that you've got this magnum opus that you're working on or that you want to please your partner or whatever. It just goes, I just want to survive. And, this thing scares me. So go do this instead. Right. And I think you're right. When it comes to theming, most people are already doing it. Like that's the thing is when you mention it, it's like, and so there's a permission, there's a validation and a permission there that makes you, again, the church is another example I use with people all the time. When you go to church, like theming days has been around forever. Like there's this book called The 7-Day Circle, which is about the history of the week. And the author talks about how the week is the only man-made structure of time. It's the only one. Every other one is nature, seasons, months, years. Man made it, and it's been modified so many times over the years. Weeks used to be 28 weeks long, 28 days long, 10 days long, like all over the place. And a lot of it was revolved around, again, religion, but frankly, theming has always taken place. I mean, hell, the names of the days are themed. Sunday is technically the first day of the week. The sun comes up. Like that's what it. So once you get your head wrapped around it and break through some of the biases, because I think that's the biggest problem, then all of a sudden you're able to go, okay. And if you do it with one thing, it makes it a lot easier to get that snowball rolling. So, and all the other dominoes start to fall too. Man, I'm mixing metaphors like crazy here.
You're once again staring into the depths of my soul. Sometimes I'll walk away from a single coaching call with like 7 different metaphors and analogies. And people are like, I'm lost in all of your analogies. I'm like, oh, you're right. There's 5 too many. Let me boil it down for you. So I totally get it. And I think that the important thing to kind of bring a lot of this conversation together, what I've learned over the years is that when it comes to this idea of being quote unquote productive, everybody starts with time management. Must manage my time. Then you realize fairly quickly, time management is really a lot more about energy management than it is about time, which is what these modes are that you're talking about. So for example, when I theme my days, Sunday is my biggest day of the week as far as American Ninja Warrior training. I do like a 4 or 5 hour session, pulling and pushing and max effort, like can barely move my arms on my upper body by 2 p.m., which tells me my energy level is going to be lower for high energy creative tasks on Monday. So Monday is my strategy day. The only two things I'll do on Monday are either meetings with my team to talk strategy, or I basically stare at the wall and stare at mind maps and think, big picture, where do I want to go? Because when you're more tired, you actually have more access to your default network and random ideas. Because the thought of having to write 10 words on a Monday, impossible. But I can stare at a blank wall or stare at the sky and be like, oh, I should do this or do this or do that. So it's about the theming combined with the energy management. But there's another level that I want to talk about. That I've discovered recently, and maybe this is something you discovered years ago, but given that we're on the exact same plane of existence and we just didn't know the other one existed until now, there's a third level that I've called emotional management. So let me walk you through what this means. So you had mentioned this idea of energy management, where if I know that I have 30 minutes between meetings, for example, and I do the math, if I have 5-minute tasks tagged in Trello or Asana or Notion or my bloody Post-it notes, whatever it is, then I know I can get 6 tasks done in those 30 minutes. It's just math. But then there's the flip side of that to me, which is, what if I don't want to do anything and I want to be okay with it and not feel ashamed that I wasn't the most efficient I could be with that 30 minutes and getting those 6 5-minute tasks done? So a recent thing that I've been experimenting with actually has to do with the member of my crew back here, which is my puppy. So I found that when I'm done with either a Zoom meeting, a team meeting, a client call, or even a podcast, I am just amped up. Like, I put all of my energy into these conversations. So I spend 15 minutes of the 30 lying on my couch with my puppy on top of me. And I just sit there because I'm managing the level of anxiety and energy and bringing it back down so I can more sustainably work my way through the day. And I feel like we all start with the time. It's all about the minutes, all about the math. Oh, it's about ultradian rhythms. And it's about how do I, manage the low energy versus the high energy. But now I'm kind of getting into that inception realm of productivity. Like, there's a whole nother level with like emotional and stress management and anxiety management that has really been interesting in increasing my output.
Well, what's also interesting is that if you have those things tagged, if you have a way to direct your attention to your intentions and you trust it, then you can get away with doing that a lot more often. Because the anxiety of like, well, now what do I do? It's like, hold on. Okay, what day is it? Oh, it's Monday. Monday's my strategy day. Okay, so I'm only so you're giving yourself these waypoints, and the questions are far easier to answer. That's why, again, and I have horizontal theming as well, which is like time of day. And so I know, based on being a night owl, that I'm going to be way better later in the day doing creative work than earlier in the day. But I know earlier in the day, that stuff's still going on in my head, like you mentioned, right? So I will do all my coaching calls, podcast interviews earlier in the day because I can feed off the energy of others. It's like being a vampire of sorts, I guess, right? And I have a background in performing, comedy, improv, all that stuff. So I know that I get something from being in front of an audience, right? And after that, once I give, I need to take that break. And I can, because the part of my brain that goes, no, you got to keep going. It's like, well, no, I don't, because when I'm done this, I'll just make a decision where to go next based on the parameters I already have in place, which again are very sustainable. When someone first, I remember Joey Cofone from the Baron Fig company, and on the Eureka podcast, he interviewed me and he goes, it sounds like a very rigid system, Mike. It sounds really rigid. I'm like, well, it's rigid. I think it sounds rigid because you're not in it. Like when you're in it, it doesn't feel rigid. And also the way I would never expect somebody to do, all 7 days of the week being themed and horizontal themes across the board. Like there are limits, and also it evolves over time too, right? You were talking about Monday being the day where you're worn out because of Sunday, all the training you do. Reason Friday is cheat day is because by the end of the week, I'm zonked. Friday used to be my deep work day. And I was journaling and going, like, I'd go, did I live up to my theme day today? And like 9 times out of 10, I'm like, no, why? So I kept asking, I'm like, oh, it's because it's on a crappy day. Like I need to move deep work off of Friday because Friday, and the reason it wasn't there is because when I was watching my son, when my son wasn't in school, we basically had he was in daycare, but Wednesdays was the day that I had to myself. So Wednesday was my day off or something like that. And it was the schedule had evolved to the point where I needed to move it because the way it worked before wasn't going to work now. And that's why I call this thing TimeCrafting. It's like, I'm not a fan of the term time management, to be honest. I don't think, again, one of those rules I wrote down was the most important relationships you need to foster are the ones with yourself and the one with time. Because time, I don't think we should be managing time because time won't be managed. It won't be. It moves on whether we want it to or not. We don't have control over it. So how can you manage something that you can't control? You can craft it. But and again, artists know this. You're never done crafting until you're done. Like you're gone. Like you're finished. You've taken your last breath, right? So to me, I think really what we should be focusing on is developing a better relationship with time, and then those things that live inside it, energy, processes that we build. Attention, because attention, all these things live in time. Cadence, how we pace ourselves, expectations. That's a huge one. Like when you said that, you took the walk and they walk in the office and you're like, where are you? Like they had an expectation that you would always be in the office and you never agreed to that. That wasn't part of the deal. So those are all things that live within time like we do. And Oliver Burkeman wrote, have you read Oliver Burkeman's book?
Oh, yes. I actually was just emailing him this week about getting him on the podcast.
Oh, the one, like it's the book, when you read a book and you're like, man, I wish I wrote this before. Like there's a lot of stuff in it, but there's one thing that he said, because in the book that got me really thinking about this. And again, I was on a walk. I was listening to the audiobook and he said, what if instead of time happening to us, we are happening to time? And he's not wrong, because time was here before us and time will be here after us. So what we should be doing, and you mentioned your spouse, like you wouldn't manage your spouse. Like you would, that would not work well.
Can you imagine selling a course on spouse management, how well that would go?
Right. So the idea is time, you think of it that way. I think if you think of time as you want to develop a really good relationship with time, then you're going to do the things that we've been talking about. You're going to take the rests that you need. You're going to pause. You're going to pay attention, because that's what time wants from you. And ultimately you want that from time. So instead of trying to manage something that can't be managed or won't be managed, try to have a better relationship with it. You have kids, same thing. Like you can teach your kids stuff, but eventually they're going to be their own, you can't control them. You can lead them, you can shape them as much as possible, but they're still they're their own thing. And so is time.
Yeah. I'm pretty confident time is doing a very good job of managing us and not the other way around.
Exactly. And it's really, really interesting. I was reading a book called The Art of the Idea, and Mother Nature came up in it. And then Father Time showed up ever so briefly. We don't talk about Father Time as much as we talk about Mother Nature. We don't. We talk about like Mother Nature will have its way. Like we can't control nature, Mother Nature, but we don't talk about Father Time in the same way. We don't say like, sometimes we say like we're pushing back against the sands of time and all that stuff. It's interesting because I think we should be talking about Father Time as much as Mother Nature. I know we can see nature and we can feel it and we can touch it, where we can't do that with time, theoretically. But I mean, those moments, as we get older, and we know there's time dilation, there's science around all this, but I can tell you, and I'm sure you feel the same way to some degree, is the way I look at time has changed so radically, not just because I study, this field, but my daughter is 17 and she's having a Halloween party tonight, and when I look at her, I gauge my own time based on how old she is now, as opposed to how old I am, because I do not feel 48 years old. I don't think I look 48 years old either. But the point is that I judge like, wow, it's been 17 years. That's crazy to me. Where did all the time go? And that's another phrase we use, like, where did all the time go? It's just fascinating to me that we spend time measuring things like productivity quantitatively. and time quantitatively. How much time do I have? But those moments where we take a moment, not a minute, but a moment, because a moment could be any length, and we look at our kids, or we look at the way a city has changed, or whatever. Or, I went to Hoover Dam a few years ago and I saw like the erosion levels, and I'm like, if you just take a moment and think about that stuff, there's a qualitative element that goes that we don't pay enough attention to. We forsake quality for quantity, which I talked about initially. And I think that those moments you have with your puppy, and the moments you had running up and down the stairs, and the moments that I'm going to have later tonight in the study while music's blasting, and my daughter who gave notes to all of the neighbors saying, hey, I'm having a party. Like, those things we don't think about as much. And if we spent more time with that stuff, and maybe that's why I love journaling so much, I think that we would have a healthier relationship with time, and we would be more productive, and definitely we would feel more productive too. I think, and feeling matters. You talked about emotion. Feelings really matter. We're the only ones that can feel, like, we can feel stuff. We should try to do that more instead of trying to deal with it. Try to feel it a bit more.
Yeah, I've been having this conversation with a client of mine recently, because he's in the process of wanting to put together a documentary about dogs, and how dogs, they're not playing fetch thinking, should I be playing fetch more often? Should I be playing less often? Maybe I need to get a bigger stick next time, right? They're just there and they're in the moment, right? And when it comes to this idea of like children and looking at them as a barometer of time, you want to know how fast time goes, have a kid.
Yep.
Because you're right. It's like everything changes, and you feel yourself getting older, and you have the sense of, well, I was at the beginning of my career and I'm progressing. Then you have a kid, everything about you stops. And then all of a sudden, your barometer for how quickly things are disappearing is their age. You're like, you were born like a week ago, and now you're in middle school, you're in high school, right? And we say, where does the time go? But the time didn't go anywhere. But I think we're too afraid to ask the question, what have I been doing and how have I been consuming my time since this last moment that I remembered? Because that scares the shit out of us.
Of course it does.
And that one of the things about time that I've really been looking into more to better understand it is how we define it, what our relationship is to it. And what I have found that I've spent my entire career doing as a storyteller working in Hollywood is that, yeah, we tell stories and we create experiences, but ultimately my job is to create individual moments. That moment where this thing happens in a story where you feel something. And I thought to myself, what if the way that we have money or dollars as a currency, what if we have moments as a currency? And if my goal for the rest of my life is to accrue as many meaningful moments as possible, that changes the way that I value my time. So I know that something that you've expressed in some of your podcasts before is that it's one thing to have a goal. I'm working towards building this business. I have this amount of revenue, right? And I'm going to have to make sacrifices for my family in the process. But you only get one chance for your kid to be 7 years old and want to sit and read that book, or 4 years old and put the Lego set together. I can always build another business. I can always read another book. I can always achieve another goal and reach another, revenue benchmark. But that moment is only going to exist at that time, and I can't miss it. Like for the last 2 weeks, I've been telling my team and anybody on social media, my complete calendar, everything about my life is totally blown up. It's a giant dumpster fire of productivity, so to speak, because my son, who's now 12 years old, he decided he was going to turn our carport into a haunted house. And in the process of doing so, he's like me, he went all out. And we have the LA Daily News doing an interview about it. And then we were on KTLA 5, which is the biggest news station that everybody watches in LA. It's now my entire life. My entire Friday afternoon, like your cheat day, I'm spending the whole afternoon writing on these big pieces of poster board, free Halloween house, this way, big arrow, and putting it on street signs. That was not a time block on my calendar regarding my objectives. Right? But all of the objectives can be done next week or next month. My 12-year-old son is never going to have a Halloween experience like this again. He might have it when he's 13. He might have it when he's 14. He's never going to have it again when he's 12. right? So I feel like a big part of productivity, like we talked about, prioritization, and I want to accrue meaningful moments. And it's frustrating as hell when I had other things I wanted to do, but there's no question in my mind, this is just what I have to do.
You journal, right? Do you journal? Do you keep a journal?
I don't journal as much as I would like to. I'm one of those people, and maybe this is something you can help me with. We're going to turn this into free coaching for a session. I am one of those people that has a stack of 12 really nice, high quality Moleskine journals that have 10 pages filled out that I never finish. And I just started journaling again, but I can't seem to stick to it. Not because I don't think it's valuable or I don't get use out of it. I just can't stick to it. But I know how valuable of a practice it is.
So I have a similar thing. My wife has banned me from buying any more journals or pens or anything like that. Baron Fig, I think she actually made sure that Joey doesn't allow me to order anything from Baron Fig again. But I don't write my journals in a notebook as much. I have occasionally, but like I wrote in this little mini notebook I was telling you about while I was sitting at the pub, because I'm like, I'm waiting here. I'm going to do this because I'm having thoughts that are coming to mind. I actually dictate my journal entries in an app. So I actually use an app for this because I feel that this is where tools can remove friction, right? So I don't think I would not be journaling if I was writing it out. I would not be journaling probably if I was typing them out, because by the end of the day, my brain is going, you're too tired. You wrote all day. You've done all this stuff. What's the point? So I dictate my journal entries into drafts, and then I copy and paste them into the journaling app that I use, which is called Reflection, which is available for both Android and Mac. I tried to find out, and it's web-based and all that stuff. And that's how I do it. And because I dictate it, it takes me like 3 minutes. And I don't have people say, well, how do you journal? What do you do? Like, what's your frame? I'm like, I don't have one. I just, bleh. Like, because I'm not saying prompts aren't helpful. I think they can be. But the thing is I don't want that to be the barrier, right? Like I'm trying to go from friction to flow as quickly as possible. And anytime I find friction, I try to figure out where that is. That's probably the most analytical I get about, and it's a process, right? So that falls into things that live within time. Like I can manage that process. So, or process, depending on who I'm talking to. But I think that if you were to remove the friction of, and there's other friction with notebooks too. Like, oh my God, is this, my notebooks are so precious. Is this worth putting in here? I don't want to wreck it. Like that kind of stuff. I think that if you were to give yourself the ability to do it the way similar to the way I do it. I mean, after all, you said we're like living on the same plane, so you might as well just keep going. It'll help because that's how I've been able to do it. And what's great is you don't realize the benefits of journaling until you look back. Until you go back, and I actually have a task every quarter to go back and read the previous quarter. And then on New Year's Day, because I don't celebrate New Year's Day on New Year's Day, like I start my year in September to kind of mirror the year for the school kids. Martin Short does that. There's a few others that have Gretchen Rubin, like they kind of like they've always kind of guided their year by schooling. And I go back on New Year's Day, so January 1st, and I will read all of my entries. Like that's the book I read that day. And it is fascinating because you see patterns. Like, I should have written today. Why didn't I write today? Like showing up like 38 times. You're like, all right. So clearly this is something I have to work on. Or you beat yourself up because you don't spend enough time with your kids. You think you're not spending enough time. That's the thing, right? I'm not spending enough time. But those moments that you're talking about, you see them there. Like, so my son and I went to Disneyland this past summer. The whole family went down to Anaheim, and my son saved up all his money to build a lightsaber. And I wanted to build one too because I'm a geek, but we just couldn't justify the expense. But I got to go in with them because if they're under 14, I think you get to go in with them or something like that. So I went in, and I'm thinking I'm going to get to watch this whole thing. And he's picked out his things, and it's so fantastic. And I have a photo of it. That's the other thing I do is I'll take a photo, and that's what I use as a prompt if I'm stuck, right? Because your phone has the ability to do that. And I'm in this, the lightsaber building area, and the show's about to start. And he goes, Dad, I need you to turn around. What? He goes, I need you to turn around because I don't want you to know what color I picked for the kyber crystal, which is like the thing what the blade will look like. And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, okay. And I turn around and the wall is maybe like 6 inches from my, like the room is so packed that it's like maybe 6 to 8 inches away. So I'm facing this wall while everyone's building their lightsaber and I'm not allowed to turn around. And he wanted me in there for the experience, but for literally 2/3, if not 3/4 of the experience, it's me. And no one knows why I'm facing the wall. All these people are like, why is this guy facing the wall? Like, shouldn't you be watching this experience? And so I faced the wall for almost all of it until he reveals that he chose purple. Like they unveil it and all that stuff. And in my journal that night, I wrote like lightsaber situation. And there's a photo of it, but I'm like, the most memorable part of that was him making me turn around to not watch it. And I did it because that's what mattered most to him. It mattered that I was there, but it also mattered that he wanted to surprise me with the blade. Because there's one of 4 options. And that was the best part of the whole experience. And I wouldn't remember, I remember it because it's pretty vivid still, but journaling about it means like when I'm 80, I can go back and go, I remember that. Like I get, there's Jessamine West says journalists get to live life twice. And I think that there's something there because a moment is a place in time, but it doesn't have a quantitative element to it. With a journal, you can at least put some attention to it. Like this happened on August 28th. Oh, like today, you're going to have that whole, that's going to be something you'll always remember, but the raw feeling in that moment gets captured in the journal. Like, it was frustrating that my whole week blew up, but man, smile on my kid's face was worth it, or whatever it is. Journaling is the most undervalued and underused quote productivity/time management tool that you can have, because if the calendar offers like kind of the details of your days, the directory of your days rather, like where you need to be and the to-do list is the details, right? It's like, here's what's happening in this. The journal is the story. The journal is the story of your life. Like it is. And that's why you've got like Alan Richman's book that sold like crazy. You've got Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, which Ryan Holiday talks about all the time. And he is the first to say, like, this was not meant to be. It's not like Marcus Aurelius had a publishing deal and said, I wanted you to publish my journals. And this book, this Assassin's Cloak book that I'm reading, it's like all these journal entries there's just something raw about them. And the patterns that you can see, and you can figure out behaviors. And, sometimes you'll find the moments that you thought were mundane end up being some of the most magical ones you have.
It's funny you bring up this idea of journaling and patterns, because we have this thing in my coaching community that we call the woo-woo factor. Mm-hmm. I'm not a big fan of all the woo-woo and the universe stuff and just manifest it in the law of attraction and it'll happen. I think that we need to have intention and effort and action to go into all of it. Sure. But you can't discount this thing called the woo-woo factor. Nope. So the experience I just literally had 2 days ago has everything to do with what you just said, in which I've been going back to where you said about this idea of you want a writer to clean his desk, get him to write a book. Yep. Clean my desk for the first time in 3 months, right before this podcast conversation, because I had to prep for it. I'm like, well, I'm really feel like prepping for the podcast. No offense to you whatsoever, but just wasn't feeling it. It's a Friday. Mm-hmm. I'm like, I'm just going to listen to one of his podcasts and I want to move around. You know what? Maybe it's time to clean off the desk. So for the first time in 2 months, I have a clean desk. But the addendum to that is that I also have been cleaning out and reorganizing my exercise room, because I had a whole giant stack of books and I needed to get them on the bookshelf, and I didn't have space on the bookshelf. And it was an entire day's project just to put the books on the bookshelf. Mm-hmm. It's welcome to a day in my life. The point being, I found the whole random stack of journals that I never fill out. Mm-hmm. And I found that I had purchased the 5-minute journal. Yeah. It was a very popular one in like the mid teens. Yep. Right. So I bought it into 2016 or 2017, used about 30 pages of it, like I do for all journals. Mm-hmm. And the last entry was in 2017, almost to the day 5 years ago. Wow. But then I looked at one of the affirmations, and it's the exact same goal that I had for this year. I'm like, son of a bitch. I have had I won't say what the exact thing is, sure, but quantifiable down to an actual number, because it's a business goal. Mm-hmm. The exact same goal that I wrote 5 years ago is the goal that I have now. which to me was a pattern of I'm clearly not putting enough action towards this. Had I been journaling for the last 5 years, probably would have had a little bit more attention towards that, and maybe would have made the shift sooner. But it was a really eye-opening moment for me.
And I don't do a weekly review either. I don't do a weekly review because I journal every day. So I just go back and read the
That's
journaling.
productivity heresy. You are a failed productivity expert if you are not doing your weekly review consistently.
Nope. Journaling, it allows me to course correct that much faster. Like by seeing it and going back, the most review I do is read the journal entries from the week gone by. That's it. And it's because I know it's really hard to go through all that stuff. And again, by Friday, I'm wiped. Sunday is my planning day. I want to plan forward. And so by me looking at those things from the previous week, I've already kind of got them in my head as to what, and I've already kind of started to lay the groundwork out. So no, I don't. And I know a lot of people that are productivity folks are like, well, wait, well, how do you know? How do you know? I'm like, the journal. It's the journal, because, and I'm not a huge fan. Like I love what the folks at, cause they also have the productivity planner, the same people that did the 5-minute journal. I love that it's gotten people to journal because it only takes 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. What I'm not a fan of is the prompts, because when you have prompts, they could be both a blessing and a curse, right? Like if you don't have anything that will fill that prompt, your brain goes, see, this is useless. Like I'm not going to use the whole book. Like what's the point, right? It's the same thing with a dated planner is that if they miss a couple days, it's like, oh, great. What a waste. I shouldn't even bother planning. Like that's what you end up going up against. So I think that yeah, I mean, the 3 ingredients, and this was another rule that I wrote down for like my 6 standards was keep a calendar, to-do list, and journal, and be a steward for all 3 because they all matter. And I can't tell anyone how to necessarily use a calendar to their absolute liking. Can't do the same thing for a to-do list or a journal. Because frankly, I don't want to be an absolutist. I want to be somebody who's like, I mean, the middle is not sexy, but the center always holds. And it's funny, as a Star Wars geek, I keep thinking the quote that Obi-Wan Kenobi says to Anakin Skywalker when Anakin turns and he says, Anakin says, like, if you're not my friend, then you're my enemy. And Obi-Wan goes, only a Sith deals in absolutes. I'm like, nope, not true. Jedi do too. Jedi, like it's only like somebody who's somewhere in the middle, or that follows the quote, the will of the Force, like Qui-Gon Jinn does, as opposed to like what the Jedi Council is doing. And Star Wars geeks know what I'm talking about. But the point is that I think when you have absolutism, then there's no chance for sustainability, because any kind of thing that breaks it or even puts a little like flaw in your theory immediately. It just the whole house of cards starts to tumble, which means it's not sustainable. So journaling to me needs to be something that it's the most personal aspect. It's the one that if you need a prompt, you've got them available, but you don't need it. If you are stuck, hey, there's an app on your phone that'll help you. Or, there's, you could use Evernote. I don't want to use a new tool. Well, great. Use Evernote, like make a notebook, do that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's not easy, but there is a lot of simplicity involved in this stuff when you really take a moment to think about it and pause.
I'm glad you bring up the idea about prompts because when I'm on your podcast, one of the accolades or bullet points when you do the intro is that I am the founder, CEO, and president of Overthinkers Anonymous. And anybody that gives me prompts, I immediately think to myself, and as somebody who's talked to Gretchen Rubin, as I have, I'm sure you're familiar with the 4 tendencies.
Yep.
Questioner on steroids.
Oh,
well,
really?
I don't know. Is this the 5-minute journal can take me 60 minutes? Because I'm like, I don't know. Are these the 3 best things I should be grateful for today? And I don't know. Are there alternate affirmations? And are these the best things that I did with my day? Yeah. So, and for me, if I were to get a day planner, it's like, well, 3 days that I didn't fill it out, this goes in the garbage because it's not perfect, right? Years ago with exercise, got the P90X program. Get 7, 8, 9 days in, you miss 1 day. Well, I failed. I didn't do P90X, so I have to start over, which is absurd. But that's my default wiring, is that it must all be perfect. So that's why I think for so many of the journals, even the empty ones, it's like you said, well, I've got this nice moleskin and it's this beautiful paper and it's got the little ribbon. I don't want to waste this. So I need to be writing meaningful and useful things in my journal. It can't just be garbage. But yeah, if I've got an app in digital space and I just want to talk to myself like a homeless person while I'm in my backyard, go for it. So that could be a good way to do it.
What's interesting is you just said something that I think is absolutely the thing that we do, and it's so ass backwards, is I want to write something meaningful or purposeful in this journal, not just garbage. But there's no way for you to know what is garbage and what, like, you can't disseminate that. It's like, it's the idea of like the first shitty draft, right? Like that first draft that's not good. And then you look at it again with a fresh set of eyes and you're like, oh, this is not as good as I thought. Or, oh, wow, this is like, I've come across blog posts that I've written. I was looking up some night owl stuff because I'm digging more into that because no one really talks about it. People are like, yeah, be an early riser, and night owls are like, what? Wait, but we do it too. And so I'm like, I need to do more research on this. And I started doing some online research, just Googling around who else has written about night owl stuff. And somebody on a WordPress site wrote about a night owl. I'm like, oh, this is a pretty comprehensive article. And like, here's how you can survive being a night owl. And I get about 3 paragraphs in, and then all of a sudden they say, Mike Vardy, and it's like, oh crap, they're talking about the things that I like, they learned from me. And I'm like, that's hilarious. Going back again to the everything new, you have to make something new all the time. But it's funny. You brought up Gretchen Rubin, who's been I've chatted with Gretchen on a number of occasions. She has the 4 Tendencies course, which I think I'm a case study for. So you're a questioner. But are you a questioner that also tries to put upholder stuff in place? Because I mean, the idea of I'm an obliger who uses tactics to make myself an upholder. So for example, that's why theming works. That's why, because otherwise I will just do what someone else wants. Like I will do what, whereas it sounds like, are you a pure questioner? Or are you a questioner that uses?
No, I'm the most volatile combination of all. I am equal parts questioner and rebel. So I can question something to the nth degree and have it all laid out perfectly in my calendar. And then the result is, you're not going to tell me what to do. Screw this. I'm going to do nothing this week. So welcome to the inside of my head.
Again, journaling will help.
Yeah. So I'm sensing a theme from today's conversation.
Yeah. It's so, again, I think we get so caught up in the tools because the tools are so, again, like money, like nature. You can see it, you can touch it. And there's an achievement that happens when you learn something, right? Like I mastered this, like Notion's a great example of that. I mean, I know a bit about Notion, but I don't know a lot about it. And the old Mike would have dove in like full on, right? Yeah, I mean, I know Asana. I would have gone. And then, but here's the problem with it is that it could be anything. It's like Evernote was whenever, like Evernote could be anything. Like people were using Evernote for productivity, like a to-do list and project management, which I think is a terrible idea to this day, but they were using it for that. Notion can be almost anything. And there is a limit to, I think there's a law of diminishing returns when you're focused on the tool as opposed to, the fundamentals, like the pillars. It'd be the equivalent of me going to golf with my brother, who's a really great golfer, and he has crappy clubs and I buy the best clubs money could buy. First off, I hate golf, so that's already a strike against me. And then secondly, I don't know how to golf very well. So he would kick my ass with the cheapest clubs because he knows how to do it. He gets so no matter what course he plays on, what clubs he uses, he knows what to do. I would not. And I think people often want that, well, the tool will help me. The tool will do it. And the tool won't. Garbage in, garbage out. I mean, that's the way it goes. So if you can find a way to, like the fundamentals, capture everything, have a process that easily transfers from one tool to another, journaling to figure out, like, to keep that evolution going in the right direction that you want it to. Those are really the things that you can start with. And then, and I know we talk about optimizing, then optimize, right? It's almost like it's almost like people try to optimize before they have things too fully, like before things are working properly, right? You can't optimize things without having the fundamentals in place first. And I think that's where it's not sexy. It's not necessarily the fun work, but it's the essential work. It's the work that needs to be done so that you can ultimately, hit those levels that you want to hit.
Yeah, exactly. And I think focusing so much on the tools and the process again is such a hindrance to focusing more on the result. So for me, if somebody's like, well, I use this calendar program and I do this to-do list, I'm like, I don't care. At the end of the week, do you feel fulfilled by how you used your time? Can you sleep well at night knowing that you put your time, your energy, and your attention in the right places? If so, I don't give a crap what tools you use or even what your system is. But if you're not fulfilled with that time, that's where I think you and I are able to help people fill those holes. But I, over and over in all the courses that I teach, whether it's about Trello or Evernote or all the apps, like I like to get into the weeds with this stuff because it's fun.
Sure.
But I say it every single lesson ad nauseum. If this doesn't work for you, don't do it. Yep. This is my way. This is not the way or the right way. This is just what works for me. Take what you need. Don't use what doesn't work for you as long as you go to sleep at night feeling good about how you used your time. I mean, what more can you ask from being a human being?
And I think that the people that's the thing people need the most help with. That's we're solving the right problem as opposed to solving a problem that really is getting too much fuel. And it's not really a problem. The only reason it's becoming a problem is the fuel it's getting. I talk about my wife watches a lot of the firefighting shows. I think she watches any show that has like a first responder in it. Which is
so she must love the Chicago Fire, Chicago Med, that whole series.
She does. Oh, yes. She's watching, what's the one that Station 19, the Grey's Anatomy spinoff, whatever. And whenever I talk to somebody about, and again, real world storytelling kind of examples, is people are like, they'll say things like, I'm putting out fires all day long. And I hate that phrase so much because I think it's disrespectful to anybody who actually fights fires for a living. Because what they're describing is it's like a scatter shot. It's almost like plugging a hole in a dam, right? But they say fighting fire. I'd rather say I'm trying to plug all these holes in the dam. That makes more sense. But firefighters legitimately let certain things burn so that they can do certain things. So they will let a fire go in certain direct, like they'll redirect, whether it's a forest fire, a building fire, whatever. There's a strategy behind fighting fires. And when they say I fight fires all day long, I'm like, that just the tone they use, just implies no strategy whatsoever. It's just like, I'm just gonna, it just drives me nuts. And I think that if more people, again, it just boils down to having that better relationship with time, which really boils down to the pause, taking a beat. I can't tell you how many times, Zach, when I have a talk where I basically take 60 seconds and say, let's not do anything for 60 seconds. Close your laptop, close this, and just don't close your eyes. Don't close your eyes. Keep your eyes open. We're not going to do anything for 60 seconds. And I'm on stage and it works really great live because there's an uncomfortableness, right? Like there's this, and I will do things like sit down, like I'll do some act out. And at the end of it, I'll say, okay, time's up. And then I'll say, how did that feel? And the audience will say, some people say, it felt great. Oh my God, it felt like I was wasting so much time. Like I felt anxious. I felt this. And I said, who felt like the time went by really quickly? And a bunch of people raised their hands. Not as many as people said, like, who felt that took forever. And a lot of people raised their hands. I'm like, can you raise your hand, the people who thought it went quickly? I'm like, do you meditate? And almost all of them kept their hands up. And I said, good. I go, I figured that. And those that felt it went by, really, really slowly, do you meditate? And most of them don't. And I say, well, first off, I got a confession to make. That wasn't a full minute. It was 48 seconds. Like I actually never give a full minute. And I say, it felt really long. If you just took a minute and actually pause to think, I'm not saying not do anything, do actually just take a beat. Imagine how much better you'd be in decision-making, focus, all that stuff, just to take a minute. And by the way, you didn't even take a full minute. You can take 30 seconds if you want. I don't care. But the power of that pause is so important. And I don't know why we don't feel like we can't do it. External demands, all that stuff. That's probably why. But it's important. You have to do it. It's the only, I think it's the key to having that better relationship is to notice, is to pay attention, is to pause, is to slow down. I don't like the term slow productivity either. That's making its way around either, because I think that's going to be corrupted and it's going to make it sound, you might as well call it lazy productivity for people that are so obsessed with being productive. If anything, it should be deliberate. Like, and again, slow productivity, those two words are a paradox for a lot of people. But slowing down or pausing is probably a better way to put it. And those pauses happen. And so that's where you can figure out what to fix, what doesn't need to be fixed, what to chronicle, what not to like all those things happen in those little moments, those moments that we fail. We fail to take more often than not.
Couldn't agree more. On that note, I could probably go on for at least another, 3-4 hours, because I feel like we barely scratched the surface. As usually happens with my best guests and best conversations, I've hit about 8% of my prep sheet. But this has been just immensely valuable, just to me personally, I'm sure to my guests as well. I'm very much looking forward to the conversation where you get to be in charge and I get to be the guest. And something tells me that this might end up being a multi-part series, because I think you and I have a lot in common, and only wish that we had crossed paths much sooner, but I have a feeling that we can rectify that.
Absolutely.
But given everything that we've talked about, I know that for a fact, the one area where you can very easily and effectively help people is with this idea of time crafting. Mm-hmm. So we've talked about a lot of the components of it, but for anybody listening that actually wants the nuts and bolts, they want to break it down, they want to read about it. I've gone through your time crafting guide or kit. You can mention the name of it, but I went through it, and like you reading Oliver Berkman, it was me reading it like, damn it, why didn't I write this? So that's a big endorsement from me, because I really believe, as we've talked about, that productivity is a much bigger thing than just, the time blocking and the Pomodoros and the to-do lists. And I feel like this time crafting starter kit that you have is really a much better way to look at time more sustainably.
Yeah. So if people want to get it, it's easy. Productivityist.com/kit. You have to give me your email, but that's just like, I'm a business person as well, but it's a 26-page PDF. And it was just one of those things where I you get to a point where it's like, I want to make sure that people get this, and I want to put it in a form factor that, I want more people to do it. And I'm like, I've got books that I'm working on and so on and so forth, but this is the way I think to just get right to it. And it's a starter kit. So, it gets you started. And then there's lots of other ways to you can just follow me on Twitter too. Once you get it and you go, Mike, I have questions, because I'm pretty active on Twitter, at Mike Vardy on Twitter.
Yeah, who knows where Twitter is going to be by the time anybody actually listens to this.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I'm on LinkedIn too. So don't forget that. It's probably that to be honest, I should be spending more time on LinkedIn because of all the LinkedIn learning classes I have. But
isn't it funny? I say the same thing. I'm never on LinkedIn, and I have like 5 classes on it. I'm never there.
It's like, you know what it's like? LinkedIn to me is almost like, it's like, the movie Office Christmas Party, where like the Christmas party is happening in the actual office building. That to me is what LinkedIn's like. It's like, I feel weird in this office building, like having a party, like where Twitter didn't feel that way. Facebook certainly, well, whatever. None of these platforms I think are, especially now, Twitter is going to be interesting. Like, I don't know what it looks like. I don't know how it's going to hold, what Elon's going to do with it. Who knows? I know that as of this recording, the 4 executives got let go almost immediately. Mm-hmm. So there's changes afoot. But yeah, the biggest thing that, like, I will be spending more time probably doing some YouTube stuff, some video, because that people want to see me more. And then, of course, the podcast, A Productive Conversation, which I can't wait to have that conversation, because it's going to be a mighty productive one, I think. Yeah.
Well, the way that I can describe LinkedIn in the simplest possible terms, I feel like I'm too underdressed to be posting on LinkedIn. It's the weirdest feeling. I don't know how to describe it, but I go there, I'm underdressed. I shouldn't be posting here.
Yeah. Or it's like, just post what you post on Facebook on LinkedIn. I'm like, I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if I should be talking. It's absolutely. Yeah, I totally get that. And the thing is, LinkedIn doesn't want you to be that way. They want you to be like, hey, be. I'm like, nah, not here. I'll go do that over here on Facebook or on Instagram. That's where that stuff happens.
Exactly.
Thanks, but no thanks, boss.
Share that link for everybody one more time.
Productivityist.com/kit.
Productivityist.com/kit. And we haven't even gotten to my first question of today's interview, which is describing the term productivityist, which we'll have to get into in another show because we had a much more invigorating conversation than anything I had planned, which is why I don't plan anything. So
yeah, it's hard to say, hard to spell. And we are, you'll hear a lot more from Mike Vardy, the Productivityist, at some point in time, but right now it's still productivityist.com.
The simplest version is we're going to send people to the show notes anyway, and all the information is going to be right there at the very top. So all good. Mike, this has been an absolute pleasure. I know this is going to be fun. I didn't know it was going to be this fun. So I'm very sincere in saying that I would like to continue this conversation and get to know each other better for sure. But
absolutely.
Yeah. Very much appreciate very much appreciate you taking your very valuable time, even though you're not managing it and it's managing you and managing me and managing everybody else, but appreciate you taking your time to help out me and my audience today. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Zach. It was an absolute pleasure and I had a blast. Can't wait to do it again.